So, it's a freezing Friday in February, the car won't start, gas is flirting with your credit limit, and Ottawa just blew up the EV sales mandate. And in the same sentence, Mark Carney says, by the way, here's $5,000 if you do want an EV.
That's not a retreat. That's let's stop pretending and actually make this work for real people. Today, we're talking about why Carney scrapped the EV sales quota, why he brought back the buyer rebates, why Pierre Poilievre is furious about it, and why, once again, Canada is quietly outsmarting the United States.
So let's start with what actually died here. Under the old rules, Ottawa had this rigid EV mandate. 20% of all new vehicles in 2026 had to be zero emission, then 60% by 2030 and 100% by 2035. If you didn't hit those numbers as an automaker, you had to buy credits from companies like Tesla or face penalties.
On paper, the old EV rules sounded huge and heroic. By 2026, 1 out of every 5 cars sold in Canada was supposed to be electric. But here's the reality check. Right now, we're only at about 1 out of 10. So we're only halfway to the goal with almost no time left on the clock.
That's like telling someone who can jog 1 kilometer today that next year they have to run a full marathon, in snow, uphill. The car companies weren't whispering about this, they were yelling.
And then you add Trump's tariffs on top. He's slapping big extra taxes on cars and parts moving across the border. So it's not just a big jump in the rules, it's a big jump while someone else is kicking the ladder out from under you.
Then, Ottawa, under Carney, signs a deal that lets Chinese car makers ship about 49,000 electric vehicles a year into Canada at the same normal tariff rate.
And here's where the old rule really blew up. If Canadian and American companies couldn't hit that EV target, they had to buy credits from whoever did sell enough EVs. In this setup, a lot of those credits would end up coming from Chinese state-backed automakers. But don't worry, Carney does the adult thing that we're all supposed to do. He looks at the numbers, looks at the tariffs, looks at the China deal, and says, no, this version doesn't work in the real world. And instead of pretending it's fine, he scraps the old setup and builds a new one that still cuts pollution without forcing our own auto industry to light itself on fire. How did they do that?
Well, here's the key thing. Getting rid of old EV rules does not mean Carney is giving up on electric cars. He's not slamming the brakes. He's just changing how we measure progress. Instead of saying, you must sell this many electric cars, the new rules say, we're watching the total pollution from all the cars you sell. By 2035, that pollution has to drop so much that it's basically like 3 out of 4 new cars being electric, and the long-term aim is closer to 9 out of 10 by 2040.
So the target is still there, don't worry. The difference is Ottawa stops bossing companies around about how to hit it. They can now use EVs, plug-in hybrids, super efficient gas engines, whatever mix works, as long as the total emissions come down. If they don't, well, then they're in trouble.
And here's why that matters. Under the old setup, a lot of the money in the system was going to companies like Tesla through those credits that we talked about. They sell more EVs than they need, then they turn the extra into cash. And honestly, how many Canadians are sitting at the kitchen table right now saying, you know who really needs more money? I think it's Elon Musk.
This new plan flips the priority. Instead of shoveling cash at Tesla just so our own automakers can survive the rules, Carney builds a system that rewards companies for actually building and retooling plants in Canada and cutting real-world emissions.
And that flexibility is the point. It gives the auto sector room to make the jump without collapsing. It still pushes pollution down and keeps Canada from being chained to one tech trend just because it sounded good in a speech 3 years ago.
Meanwhile, south of the border, Trump is shredding EV rules, throwing 25% tariffs on anything that moves and pretending the clock's turned back to 1985. Canada's not copying that. We're still tightening standards. We're just not doing it in a way that kneecaps our own factories.
Okay, now let's talk about the part that people actually care about, the money. Starting February 16th this year, Ottawa is bringing back the EV incentives that ran out of cash in late 2024. up to $5,000 for the full EV, $2,500 for a plug-in hybrid, as long as the car is under $50,000.
Unless it's built in Canada, in which case there's no price cap. So that Windsor-built Dodge Charger or Pacifica, you can roll off the lot in something made here, at home, and still get the full rebate.
And the rebate isn't a blank check for anyone. The car has to be built in a country that actually has a free trade deal with us. So the US, Mexico, Europe, Korea, Japan, sure. China? Nope. Those cheap EVs everyone keeps talking about, they are not on the rebate list.
So right now, about 23 models qualify, mostly lower-priced EVs and plug-in hybrids from brands like Nissan, Hyundai, Kia, and Toyota. Plus the Canadian-built Chrysler Pacifica plug-in and the Dodge Charger from Windsor. That list will grow as automakers cut prices to sneak under that $50,000 cap.
So this is where the Canada versus USA contrast actually gets fun. Trump slaps 25% national security tariffs on Canadian autos and tells company to move south. Carney, he keeps Canada's counter tariffs in place, which are 25% on non-USMCA qualified goods, as long as Trump keeps his on. And then he turns around to Canadian drivers and says, by the way, here's help with the cost of going electric.
The incentives step down over time, down to $2,000 for EVs and $1,000 for plug-ins by 2030. But the goal is big, about 840,000 vehicles helped over 5 years. That's a serious nudge for middle-class families, not just for people shopping for luxury toys.
And because this is Canada, you can't just say, buy an EV and hope for the best. There's another $1 billion to $1.5 billion through the Canada Infrastructure Bank for charging stations from highway corridors to apartment garages. Range anxiety doesn't disappear overnight, but it's a lot easier to switch when you're not playing charging roulette on the February road trip.
Now, this isn't just about shoppers either. It's also a giant stay here, invest here, signed and aimed straight at automakers. The new plan rewrites the so-called remission rules so companies that build vehicles in Canada earn import credits. They produce more cars here, get more credits, and you can bring in models from the US or elsewhere without paying the full counter tariffs.
And if you've got more credits than you need, well, you know what you can do? You can sell them. So suddenly having plants in Ontario or Quebec isn't just nice PR, it's hard cash. That's how you leverage being a smaller country sitting next to a tariff-happy superpower.
And on top of that, there's $3 billion in tax credits and incentives from the Strategic Response Fund that's reserved for the auto sector. That money is earmarked for retooling plants, advanced manufacturing, and all the jobs that go along with it.
And Carney is explicit about why. He knows that the US is not a stable partner right now. We all do. And he's already said that those counter tariffs on US autos stay as long as Trump keeps his. He's pushing to keep free trade in the Kuzma review. And he's also saying we have to prepare for all possibilities. We must take care of ourselves.
And that's the difference. Washington is busy punishing its allies. Ottawa is busy building a system where if you make cars in Canada and sell them here, you're rewarded. If you treat us like a branch plant, well, you have to pay more.
And of course, not everybody is thrilled about this. Environmental groups are saying ditching the mandate is a step backward, and that incentives work best when they're backed by hard, enforceable rules.
And they have a fair point. If you're only looking at one graph, EVs must be 100% by 2035 or bust, this looks softer. But the trade-off here is certainty for workers and consumers. We're still tightening emissions, we're still investing in chargers and factories, we're just not pretending that Canada can jump to 100% EVs on the exact same timeline as other countries that aren't being hammered by US tariffs.
And there's another sign that this isn't just some secret giveaway to foreign companies. Unifor, the union, actually backs the plan while warning about Chinese imports. They want safeguards so that we don't get flooded with low-cost Chinese EVs. And that tells you where the real threat is coming from, and it isn't Windsor.
Bottom line, this is Canada acting like an auto nation again, not just a climate cheerleader, not just a punching bag for US politics, but a country saying we're going to build things, protect jobs, and still cut emissions. In 2026, compromise is key.
Which brings us to Pierre Poilievre, who took one look at all of this and decided his big line was that Carney is giving a new subsidy to US-made cars.
This is from the guy who's been screaming for months that families are tapped out and need relief. Carney gives people up to $5,000 to knock down the cost of an EV, and Poilievre's mad.
Also, tiny detail, those rebates are limited to countries we actually have trade deals with, and they're tilted towards Canadian-made vehicles by lifting the price cap on them. That's not a blank check for Detroit. That's a magnet for investment here in Canada.
And this is where the hypocrisy really shows. Just a few days ago, Stephen Harper is standing there saying the quiet part like a grown-up. If you care about Canada's independence and unity, the parties need to work together when the country is under pressure from the USA.
And Poilievre's answer to that call for unity is, oh, let's trash a plan that cuts emissions, helps drivers, protects jobs, and uses our trade leverage against Trump. Every word of his complaint tells you exactly what game that he's playing here.
He doesn't want a solution. He wants a permanent outrage machine. If you help workers, he's angry. If you defended Canadian factories, he's angry. If you made it easier for people to afford an EV built in Windsor instead of Shanghai, guess what, Dave? He's angry.
It's just crazy. So, where does this leave us on this cold Friday of February? Well, Canada hasn't abandoned clean transportation. It's moved from a rigid quota that was about to blow up in our face anyway, to a package that actually lines up climate goals, trade reality, and working class budgets.
We still tighten greenhouse gas standards. We still push towards an EV-heavy future. We put real money into chargers. We give families help at the dealership. And we tie the whole thing to a trade system that rewards building cars here instead of running for the border every time Trump gets up in the middle of the night and shares a Truth Social post.
In other words, while the US is busy trying to turn back the clock, Canada is quietly building the next chapter of its auto sector. One where your car is cleaner, your job is more secure, and your country isn't begging Washington for permission every time you want to sign a deal with someone else.
And if you like seeing Canada actually think ahead for a change, make sure you hit that like bar and subscribe and ring the bell and share this with the car nerd in your life. I know I've got a few.
Me too. And if you want more deep dives on why Canada doesn't have to roll over for Trump or for Pierre Poilievre's temper routine, join the A-Team and hop on our Substack.
So stay warm, everybody, stay loud, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thanks for watching. Ciao for now.